Okay, we are recording now. We're going to get started by singing a couple of songs. One of them is going to be a new song with a lot of emotions, and the other one is going to be My God Is So Big, because we love to sing that song. Reminds us every week how big and powerful and strong our God is, and he loves us so much. So I'm going to back up a little bit so you can see my emotions, and I want to see your emotions. Ready? My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. The mountains are his, the valleys are his, the trees are his handiwork too. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do for you. Good job. I can see lots of emotions going on there. Now this next song we're going to learn talks about the Sea of Galilee, and it's got a lot of motions to it. And once we learn all the motions, then we can sing it really, really fast, and that's a lot of fun. But we're going to do it slow tonight, so everybody can learn the motion. So if you know it already, you can sing along. But if you don't know it, pay attention to the motions. The words are real easy, so you'll get those quickly. Ready? Miss Tanya's got a tickle in her throat tonight, so I'm having a hard time with this singing. Okay, it goes. There's a Sea of Galilee. There's a Sea of Galilee. There's a sea. There's a sea. There's a Sea of Galilee. There's a boat in the Sea of Galilee. There's a boat in the Sea of Galilee. There's a boat. There's a boat. There's a boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are men. There are men. There are men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are hands on the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are hands on the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are hands. There are hands. There are hands on the men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are nets. There are nets. There are nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. What do you think are in the nets? Fish. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are fish. There are fish. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. Now I'm going to show you how it works to sing it a little bit faster. If you get mixed up with your motions, that's okay, because we'll keep working on them. But here it goes. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are fish. There are fish. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. Very good. I saw some of you keeping up. That's awesome. We'll keep working on that song because we're going to talk about the Sea of Galilee a lot in our next few lessons. If you want to go ahead and unmute, you can do that. Just remember not to talk unless you are answering a question, because if we all talk at the same time, it just all gets crazy on our calls. So, all right, perfect. So we've been talking about some things that happened when after Jesus grew up. And we talked about this bug right here. Who can tell me what that bug is doing on my bulletin board?
Locust.
It's a locust. That's right. Why will we have a locust on our bulletin board?
Because John ate it.
John ate it. That's right. John was a special man that God had a special job for, and he ate locusts, and he lived in the desert. That's a rough, sandy place right there. And his job was to prepare the way for Jesus. He was teaching people and getting them ready to be able to listen to Jesus once Jesus was there to start teaching. And then last week, that's what we talked about. Jesus met up with John the Baptist, and he's down here. And what is going on in this picture down here? Who can tell me? You don't have to raise your hand because I can't see all of your hands. Just say the answer out.
Jesus.
John baptized Jesus. That's right. Had Jesus done anything wrong? Had he sinned? Is that why he needed to be baptized? No. He did it to show that that was the right thing to do. And then something special happened. We have a little bird right here. Who can tell me about that bird?
It's the sun. It was God.
It was God. It was the Spirit of God, and it descended like a dove, and he said something. Does anybody remember what he said?
Let there be light.
What?
Let there be light.
Let there be light. God did say that in the very beginning. He did say that.
Hey, Miss Tanya.
But
Hey, Miss
this,
Tanya.
yes. Who says, who needs to tell me something?
Paper. John baptized Peter because God was his son. Because God was his dad.
Uh-huh. Yes, and that's what the voice said. The voice said, this is my son, and I am very pleased with him. And then remember I told you that right after that happened, Jesus was led away into the wilderness, and he stayed there for 40 days without eating anything. And then the devil came and tried to trick him and tried to tempt him to make some bad choices, just like the devil had tempted Adam and Eve a long time ago. But Jesus did not make bad choices, did he? No, Jesus made good choices, and he said, you devil, you get away from me. I'm going to make the good choices. So tonight we're going to talk about how Jesus started teaching people about God and about how they could be reconciled, which means to be back together again with God. He was starting to fix the big disaster, but he knew that he was not going to be on earth for very long, so he needed some special helpers. And so we're going to talk tonight about those special helpers. He picked 12 special helpers. Does anybody know what we call those people?
The disciples.
The disciples. Perfect. That is right. And Jesus was going to spend a lot of time with these 12 men, the disciples, and teach them a lot of things so that they could go and teach other people. So I believe the first ones the Bible tells us about were some brothers, and they were fishermen. And Jesus saw them out cleaning their nets, and he said, come and follow me. And the Bible says they put their nets down and they came and followed Jesus. Does anybody know the names of those two men?
James.
Huh?
James.
James. Well, James was next, but the first two were Peter and his brother was Andrew. So I've got little stick men. We don't know what they looked like, but they probably didn't look like Miss Tanya's stick men. We got little stick men, and we're going to start filling up our fishing boat because that's what they did for a living. Now, some of the disciples did other things, but Peter and Andrew were fishermen.
Mommy,
Put them in my boat.
something's wrong on this.
Something's wrong?
Yes, our computer is not turning on you.
I'm sorry.
I don't know. Well, maybe Mom can help with that.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Then Jesus walked down the shore, and he saw two more men that were fishermen. They were going fishing with their father. And he said, come and follow me. And they did. And somebody named one of them a few minutes ago, James. And does anybody know what James's brother's name was that was a disciple? John, that's right. So let's put James and John in our boat.
I know John.
You know a John? There are a lot of people named John, aren't there? That's a very popular name.
John was the one that tried to save Jesus from dying on the cross.
John was there when Jesus died on the cross. You're right. He was at the cross, and we'll talk about that in a few more weeks when we get to that story. Now, Jesus said something very interesting to Peter and Andrew and James and John, who were fishermen. He said, if you come and follow me, I will make you fishers of men.
Me.
Huh? He said, I will make you fishers of men. So did Jesus mean that they were going to start casting their nets and trying to catch people?
No.
No, that's not what Jesus meant. How were they going to be fishers of men? They were going to start teaching people, weren't they? They were going to teach people so that people could choose to follow Jesus. So they were going to be like catching people for Jesus. And that's what Jesus meant by that. So let's keep going. The next disciple, we're going to put them all in the boat, even though they weren't all fishermen. The next disciple was a tax collector, which means he worked for the government and collected money from people, which meant people didn't like him very much. Does anybody know what his name was?
Zacchaeus.
Not Zacchaeus, but Zacchaeus was a tax collector, you're right, but he was not one of the disciples. I think I heard somebody else say it.
Peter.
Not Peter. Matthew. Peter's in the boat. Matthew. That's right, Matthew. And Matthew actually
put Jesus on the cross.
Yeah, Matthew actually was one of the people who wrote one of the books in the Bible that tells us a lot about Jesus. John also wrote one of the books in the Bible that tells us a lot about Jesus. Okay, now we've just got a whole bunch of other people that were disciples, and who, if you know the name of somebody else that was one of the disciples, shout it out, and I'll get their stick man and put them in there.
Mark.
Who? Mark. Well, Mark wrote one of the books that tells us a lot about Jesus, but he was not one of the disciples. He was a good friend of Peter, and Peter probably told him a lot of stories about Jesus. And Mark probably was one of the followers. Andrew, we've got Andrew already. Anybody think of another one? I'll just start telling you who they are. Okay, there was one whose name was Philip. And we know some things about him, and Philip had Thomas, yes, Thomas was one. Let's get Thomas in the boat. Later on, we learn about Thomas, and he was called Doubting Thomas because sometimes he didn't believe things that he couldn't see with his own eyes. So we had Philip, and Philip had a friend named Bartholomew. Now that's a funny sounding name, isn't it? And Philip, when Jesus called him, he went and found his friend Bartholomew and said, come and see, I found the Messiah. Bartholomew wasn't so sure about that until he talked to Jesus, and then he knew for sure that he was the real deal. So let's put Philip and Bartholomew in our boat. Okay, then there's one named Simon. Peter's name was also Simon, but we call him Peter. But there was another disciple named Simon.
And Thaddeus and Judas.
Oh, somebody is paying really good attention. Thaddeus, that is correct. And Judas, that is correct. Judas made some bad choices later on, but right now he's just one of the disciples like the rest. I've got one more.
Is that the one who made Jesus on the cross?
He's the one that betrayed Jesus. That is right. And we'll talk about that later when we get to that story. I've got one more, and he has the same name as one of the disciples that's already in the boat. So does anybody know who it was?
John.
Not John.
James.
James. There was a second disciple named James, and the Bible calls him, sometimes calls him James the Little or James the Less, because apparently he was smaller than the other James was. And so that's how they kept them apart. You know, sometimes we call people nicknames to keep them apart. So let's keep them in the Bible.
Hey, Dad, that's kind of like the guy who went on the top of the tree.
Yeah. All right. So who can tell me how many disciples are in that boat?
James.
How many? How many did we say?
12.
12. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Yeah, which way?
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We've got 12 disciples in that boat, and Jesus is going to teach them so many things so that they will be able to teach other people, because that's what disciples do. Now, we know that those disciples did teach a lot of people, but you know what? Even now, even today, people who are Jesus's followers can teach other people about Jesus and be like a disciple. We can still use that name even though we're not one of the 12 disciples, just like when I'm teaching you about Jesus, or when you're teaching somebody else or talking to somebody else about Jesus, you're being Jesus' follower and you're being a disciple of Jesus, because that just means that you're teaching someone else about Jesus. All right, let's see what's in our activities for tonight before we run out of time. Some of you may have already done this. This is pictures of some of Jesus's followers. It's not necessarily the disciples, because I see a lady right there and she would not have been one of the 12. But the trick with this page is it's left, right, and you're supposed to look at those men or that lady and decide if they are going to the left or the right. And then you can color them. There's lots of pictures of what things they might have been doing. So that's a fun activity. I've already seen some of you working on your craft stuff a little bit. We talked about that Jesus told them he would make them fishers of men.
That's why we have these fishes in the boy.
That's right. So this says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. And that's from Matthew, who is one of our disciples, wrote that, chapter 4, verse 19. So you should have a little person. It might be a girl or it might be a boy. It might look like this one or it might look a little different. You can color them. And then you should have a string, and you can just tape that string to the back of the picture. See how I did mine on that tape? Then you've got a pipe cleaner that you can fasten onto your deal. That looks like a fishing pole. Now we know that the disciples didn't use fishing poles. They used nets, but that's what we're doing. Attach the string up here, and then you've got this little red and white thing looks like that. Yours might be a little bit bigger. Does anybody know what that is?
No.
That's called a bobber. And when you're fishing, you have that on your string so that it's kind of sitting on top of the water. And when the fish bites, it pulls it under the water so you know if you've got a fish on your line. So that's what that is. And you've got a bobber. Now be careful, because the bobber can kind of catch your finger. So you want your mom or dad or big sister or brother probably to help. But you take your bobber and you push in. I have a hard time getting this on the camera. You push in this little thing on the bottom, and when you do, it makes a little hook come out on the top. I don't know if you can see that. And then you can just kind of hook it on your string and let go of that, and then that fastens it on there like that. But be careful, because that can pinch your finger if you're not careful. But that's to help us remember that Jesus said he was going to make them fishers of men. And we can still be fishers of men even now today, because we can still teach people about Jesus. And then the last thing in your packet for tonight is your snack. Who knows what that is?
Goldfish.
Goldfish, that's right. I figured that'd be the best snack to help us remember about the fish and being fishers of men. Some of you may have some of you may have time, but everybody should have goldfish unless you're allergic to milk, and then you have a different kind because we don't want anybody to get sick from eating their snack. But that's what your snack is tonight, goldfish. All right, so did somebody say something to me?
No, I don't want to.
Okay. All right, let's do our memory verse, and then I'll have a couple of announcements, and we will turn the recording. We'll say goodbye to everybody. Let's remember our memory verse. This is a really good memory verse. It comes from John, who is one of the disciples who wrote that, John, chapter 3, verse 16. So say it after me. For God so loved the world.
For God so loved the world
That he gave his one and only Son.
that gave his one and only Son.
That whoever believes on him
That whoever believes in him
will not perish,
will not perish, but
have eternal life.
But you have eternal life.
Very good. That reminds us that Jesus can fix the big disaster. And if we believe on Jesus and follow him, we can live with God forever and ever and ever. All right. Quick announcements to moms and dads. I believe the packets for next month's lessons are going to be ready for pickup on Sunday, this coming Sunday. And they'll have them out on the welcome desk like they've been doing, and you can pick those up. I'm supposed to put the snacks in tomorrow. So those will all be ready for you to pick up to have your materials for next month's lessons, which will start next week. All right, I'm going to count to 3, and we're going to say goodbye to all the people who are watching online, and then I'll stop the recording, and I can make sure I saw everybody that was here tonight. All right, let me get my computer ready. There we go. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Bye.
See you next time.
I can use it.
Oh, yes.